I never thought my wedding day would end with me bleeding on the floor, while my own parents just stood there and watched, not rushing to help, not even a flicker of panic on their faces, just cold, silent judgment, like I had somehow brought it all on myself. My name's Lena. I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, I've known one thing for sure. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. That title belonged to Mira, my younger sister. Loud, glamorous, confident in a way that made people look. She had the kind of presence my mother adored. Bold, flashy, always chasing the next big thing. Mira walked through life like she already owned it, and my parents, especially my mom, practically worshipped her for it. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. The one who'd rather spend Friday night sketching than going to some over-the-top dinner party. I worked at a small art gallery downtown. Nothing fancy, but it made me happy. I loved old books, quiet spaces, warm coffee, and the kind of conversations that didn't need shouting or champagne. To my mother, that made me boring. A letdown. She used to say things like, "You'll end up alone in a dusty studio with paint under your nails while your sister sips champagne on a yacht." And I believed her. For a long time I really did. Until Stephen. I met him on a chilly afternoon after work. I'd left early after a canceled appointment and ducked into a cafe I'd passed 100 times, but never really noticed. That day, I don't know why, but I walked in. I sat near the window with my sketchbook, watching the city blur by outside, and ordered a coffee. A few minutes later, he brought it to my table. "Here you go," he said with a soft smile. Nothing flashy, no awkward flirting, just calm, polite, genuine. I looked up, and there he was, Stephen. Slightly messy hair, kind eyes, dressed in the black apron of the cafe. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't need to. I felt it right away. He saw people. Really saw them. 15 minutes. Later, he brought me a second coffee. "Someone ordered this by mistake. Thought you might like a refill, on the house." I laughed. "Is that your move?" He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just really good customer service." That was the beginning. I started going there. More often. Not because the coffee was great, it wasn't, but because Stephen was. We'd talk during his breaks, or between tables, and I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Seen, heard, safe. He told me about the people he watched pass through his cafe. The couple that held hands every Tuesday. The man who came in every day for the same pastry but never smiled. He noticed the small things, the quiet things. I told him about art, the gallery, how sometimes silence on a canvas said more than words ever could. One evening, as the rain poured down, we sat together on a bench outside his cafe. He took off his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. "I really like spending time with you," he said softly. I looked at him and smiled. "Even if I'm not on a yacht?" He laughed. "Especially because you're not." That was the moment I knew. Not because he had money or status, but because when he looked at me, I felt like I mattered. A few months later, he proposed. No fancy dinner, no diamond ring, just a quiet rooftop garden, a hand-carved wooden box, and a trembling, honest, "Will you marry me?" And I said yes, without hesitation. But in the back of my mind, I knew what was coming. I knew my family wouldn't accept him. In their world, love wasn't enough. A man needed to come with a last name worth something. A big paycheck. A title. Stephen had none of that. He served coffee and cleared tables. And that, to them, was all they needed to know. But to me, he was everything. I chose him anyway. I chose love. Even if it meant walking away from everything I thought family was supposed to be. What I didn't know back then was that the worst betrayal of my life wasn't behind me. It wasn't when my mother told me I'd end up alone. It wasn't when they laughed at my engagement. It was waiting for me at the very altar where I stood in white. And that's where everything began. Stephen didn't have a diamond ring. He didn't rent out a rooftop or hire a photographer. There was no violinist hiding in the bushes, no champagne waiting in a bucket. Just a quiet garden, a small hand-carved wooden box he'd made himself, and his voice, shaky but steady, asking if I'd spend the rest of my life with him. And I didn't need a second to think. I said yes, because everything in that moment felt real. No performance, no pressure, just love. But the moment I stepped into my parents' house to share the news, I knew it wouldn't be celebrated. We were in the living room, the one that always felt more like a showroom than a home. My mom, Rebecca, sat stiffly on the couch, with her wine glass balanced perfectly in one hand. My dad, Oscar, was pretending to watch something on TV, even though the screen was black. And Mira was perched by the fireplace like she owned the place, already sensing there was drama on the way. She always knew. I took a breath. "I'm getting married," I said. My mom raised an eyebrow. "To whom? That gallery owner you mentioned?" I shook my head. "No, to Stephen." There was a pause, like the whole room had to process it. Then Mira blinked, tilted her head, and cracked a smile. "Wait, Stephen. As in the waiter? From that cafe you're always going to?" "Yes," I said. "That's Stephen." Rebecca let out this half-snort, half-sigh. "Are you serious, Lena? You want to marry a man who clears tables for a living?" "He's more than that," I said, trying to stay calm. "He's kind. He listens. He's the only person who's ever made me feel like I matter." "Poor," Mira added, like it was a punchline. I clenched my fists. "He treats me with more respect than anyone in this house ever has." Oscar finally looked at me, his voice low. "Does he even have a real job? Savings? A future?" "We're managing," I said. "And I'm not asking for your approval. I'm just letting you know." My mom stood up, pacing now like she was delivering some tragic monologue. "Your sister married a CEO. They just bought a house in the hills. You're throwing everything away for a man who probably can't even afford a wedding." Mira smirked. "Maybe we can have the reception at his cafe. Bring your own mug." They all laughed. I didn't. I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice didn't shake. "I didn't come here for your opinions. I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd care enough to support me. But I see now I was wrong." Rebecca opened her mouth, probably ready with another dig, but I didn't give her the chance. "I'm marrying him, not for money, not for image, because he's the one person who's ever looked at me and seen something worth loving, and I'd rather have a life full of honesty and peace than one full of cold dinners and fake smiles." And I walked out. No tears, no looking back, just a deep breath as I closed the door behind me. Stephen and I planned the wedding ourselves. Small, private, a garden just outside the city. We didn't have much, but we had each other. No guest list full of status. No champagne towers. Just flowers, soft music, and the promise of something real. A part of me still wondered if my family would show up. A part of me hoped they might surprise me. But deep down, I was already preparing for something else. Because if there's one thing I've learned about people who care more about appearances than love, it's that they don't show up just to stay silent. Sometimes, they come just to burn it all down. The morning of our wedding felt like something out of a dream. Soft sunlight, a gentle breeze, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, not empty. We had picked a garden just outside the city, surrounded by ivy-covered arches and tall trees that swayed like they were part of the ceremony. Everything felt simple, honest, ours. Stephen looked incredible, standing by the altar in a black suit, waiting for me with that calm smile I'd fallen in love with. His friends were already there, warm and familiar, all of them making me feel like I belonged. I remember walking down the aisle thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. No pretending, no performance, just love. And then I saw them. My family. Rebecca arrived in a blood-red designer dress that practically screamed for attention. She stood tall, scanning the crowd like she was judging every single detail. My father, Oscar, stood stiff beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. And Mira, God, Mira looked like she was headed to a red carpet event, not her sister's wedding. She barely glanced at me before settling into her seat next to Peter, her CEO husband, who looked about as enthusiastic as someone waiting at the DMV. But I kept walking. When I reached Stephen, he took my hand and whispered, "You're everything." And somehow those two words drowned out everything else. We said our vows, just the two of us, standing under the sun, promising to choose each other. Not just in the good moments, but especially in the hard ones. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt it. Not fear, not doubt, but peace. For the first time, I was standing in front of someone who saw me, loved me, and wasn't afraid to say it in front of the world. The ceremony ended with soft applause. His friends hugged us. Some had tears in their eyes. My family barely clapped. Mira was already scrolling through her phone. Still, I tried to hold on to the good. We had set up a little white tent nearby for a small reception. Tables were dressed with homemade centerpieces. Candles flickered in little glass jars. No band, no extravagance, just laughter, music, and love. Stephen and I sat together at the head table, fingers laced under the cloth, trying to stay present. I ignored the stares coming from my family's side. I told myself, they came. That must mean something. I was wrong. Halfway through dinner, the host tapped the microphone. And now, a few words from the mother of the bride. I froze. Stephen gently squeezed my hand. Rebecca stood slowly, her heels clicking on the wooden floor as she made her way up to the mic. She looked around with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My daughter Lena begins a new chapter today. She's always been different, sensitive, artistic. There was a pause, a shift in tone. She never cared much for appearances or ambition. While her sister Mira followed a practical path, a real career, a real man, Lena chose to follow her heart. Her voice sharpened on those last few words. I won't pretend this is the wedding I imagined, but love comes in many forms, even in cafes, even under aprons. Gasps rippled through the tent. Guests shifted in their seats. My cheeks burned. Then she raised her glass with a smile that felt more like a blade. To Lena and her waiter husband. Before I could even breathe, Mira leaned over and added, "Let's just hope he serves more loyalty than lattes." A few people chuckled. The kind of laugh you don't want to hear on your wedding day. I felt like the floor dropped from under me. But they weren't finished. Rebecca turned suddenly toward Peter, eyes wide. "Peter, where's your watch?" Peter looked down, confused. "My Rolex. It's gone." Rebecca gasped, one hand on her chest like a bad actress. "Gone?" she repeated louder. "But it was right there before dinner." The air tightened. My stomach dropped. She turned to face the crowd, her voice steady, like she'd rehearsed this. That watch is worth over $12,000. I really hope someone didn't get too excited about joining the family and take something that doesn't belong to them." Then she looked directly at Stephen. He blinked. Calm. Still. But I could feel the shift in him, like he saw it coming. "That's enough," I said, standing. Rebecca raised a hand like she was doing me a favor. "No, Lena. This is serious. I saw him near Peter's table earlier, didn't you, Mira?" Mira nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, he was getting drinks." Rebecca smiled. "Oh, wait. That's not even his job anymore. Now he's family." Whispers rose around us, people looking at Stephen, then at me. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just disapproval. This wasn't just bitterness. They hadn't come to witness my wedding. They came to destroy it. I stood there shaking, barely believing what I was hearing. My own mother accusing my husband of stealing. My sister playing along like it was some twisted game. And Peter, silent, just letting it all happen. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice cracking but loud enough to cut through the whispers. "You planned this. You came here not to celebrate, but to destroy everything." Rebecca scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Lena. If no one has anything to hide, then this should be easy to clear up." Stephen didn't flinch. He stayed calm, standing beside me, silent but steady. He didn't need to defend himself, not yet. He just watched them, like he was letting them finish digging their own hole. Oscar finally stood up. His face was red, jaw clenched. He looked at me like I had just slapped him. "You brought shame to this family," he said, voice low and shaking. "And now you dare talk back?" Stephen reached for my hand. I gripped it hard, trying to hold myself together. But Oscar wasn't even looking at him. His eyes were locked on me, full of rage I'd never seen before. Then he moved. Just behind our table, there was a small wooden bat, something one of the kids had brought earlier while playing on the lawn. I'd seen it earlier and thought nothing of it. Just a toy. But in Oscar's hands, it wasn't a toy anymore. "Dad." "No," I said, taking a step back. But I didn't get the chance to run. He swung it. The bat came down fast, and all I remember was the sound, this awful, dull thud, and then pain. White-hot, blinding pain exploding through the side of my head. I collapsed. My knees gave out, the world tilted, and suddenly I was on the ground. I could hear people screaming, glasses shattering, someone gasping. But it all sounded far away, like I was underwater. I felt blood trickling down my temple, warm and sticky. My ears were ringing. My arm wouldn't move. My vision blurred, then doubled, then swam. And then, Stephen. His voice was the only one I could still hear clearly. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted, grabbing napkins, pressing them to my head. "You hit your daughter. You actually hit her." His hands were shaking but careful. One of them cradled the side of my face, the other holding the compress. His eyes darting around for help. "Call 911, he yelled to the crowd. "Now!" Then I heard the sound of his phone dialing. I couldn't lift my head, but I could feel his arm under my shoulders holding me steady. "You want to accuse me of theft? You want to lie and humiliate her?" he said, voice trembling with fury. "Fine, but first, someone get my wife to a hospital. And after that, I'll show you who I really am." The sirens came fast. Red and blue lights flashed against the trees as 2 police cruisers pulled up beside the garden gate, followed by an ambulance. Uniformed officers stepped out, one of them walking straight toward us. He had a calm face, broad shoulders, and a voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. "Who struck the bride?" he asked. Stephen didn't hesitate. "Her father. In front of everyone. She's bleeding. She needs help now." Rebecca stepped forward, trying to wave it off. It was an accident. She was being emotional. She was standing still. Stephen snapped. and he picked up a bat and swung it. One of our friends got it on video. The officer turned to Oscar. "Sir, I need you to step aside." And then Stephen walked toward the front of the tent, toward the microphone, the same one Rebecca had used to toast our downfall. He picked it up. His voice came out steady, strong, clear. "I wasn't going to say anything today. I thought I could walk away quietly. But since you've insulted me, accused me, and now physically attacked the woman I love, let's clear something up." The whole reception froze. Even the police paused. "My name is Stephen Hale. I own Hale Developments, one of the top real estate firms in the state. 15 commercial and residential buildings under my name, including the office tower Peter's company just moved into last month." Peter's face went pale. "I have no criminal record. I've created jobs for over 400 people in this city. And yes, I worked in a cafe. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to find someone who loved me for who I am, not for what I have." He turned toward my mother. "Lena loved me when she thought I had nothing. And that's why she's the only person I've ever trusted with everything." Then he looked back at the officer. "And I'd like to press charges on all of them." Gasps broke out across the tent. The officers moved quickly. Oscar, Rebecca, and Mira were each handcuffed and read their rights. Mira shouted, "This is insane. You're ruining our lives." Stephen didn't even blink. "No. You did that yourselves." As the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, he walked beside them, never letting go of my hand. I looked at him through the pain, through the tears, and whispered, "You told them everything." He nodded. "No more lies." And for the first time that day, I finally felt safe. The ambulance ride was a blur. I drifted in and out. But every time I came back to consciousness, Stephen's hand was still wrapped around mine. Firm, steady, like an anchor. He didn't say much, just kept holding on, whispering now and then that I was okay, that help was coming. And even through the pain, through the ringing in my ears and the pressure building behind my eyes, I believed him. At the hospital, they moved fast. A scan, some stitches, a wrap around my head, something for the pain. The doctors spoke, in soft voices, the kind they use when they're trying not to scare you. One of the nurses told me I was lucky, that the swelling was minimal and I'd recover fully. Lucky. That word sounded strange, like it didn't belong anywhere near what had just happened. Stephen never left my side. Not for a second. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty words or promises. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He just stayed, sitting next to me, holding my hand, brushing my hair off my face, watching me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And somehow, in that quiet, I started to feel safe again. It was close to midnight when the doctor signed the discharge papers. Stephen helped me into his car and wrapped a soft blanket around my shoulders. I assumed we were going back to his apartment, the one I'd seen before, small and warm, with the squeaky floorboards and secondhand couch. But we didn't take that route. Instead, we drove past neighborhoods I'd only ever seen in magazines. Quiet streets with stone gates and tree-lined driveways. I sat up, confused. "Stephen, where are we going?" He didn't answer at first, just reached over and gently squeezed my hand. Then we pulled up to a black iron gate. It opened automatically when he spoke into the console. My heart skipped. Past the gate was a house. No, a mansion. Glass walls, soft lights glowing from inside, a fountain bubbling in the driveway. It looked unreal. I turned to him, still dazed. "Whose house is this?" He parked, turned to me, and said it so casually. "Mine." I blinked. "What?" He nodded. This is my home. I stared at it again, trying to process what I was seeing. Why? Why didn't you ever show me this? He looked at me with those calm eyes and said, because I needed to know. If you loved me, not the house, not the title, just me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because in that moment I understood, and he already knew. He helped me inside. The place was beautiful. High ceilings, warm wood, soft linen, and art on the walls that made the silence feel comforting instead of cold. He took me to a guest room that looked nicer than any hotel I'd ever stayed in. As I lay down under the covers, he sat beside me, held my hand, and kissed my forehead. Rest, he whispered. Tomorrow we make things right, and for the first time since the wedding, I actually slept. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows. My head ached, but the pain was dull now, bearable. What stayed sharper was the clarity, the ache that came from finally seeing the truth. Stephen brought me breakfast, tea, toast, fruit, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful, gentle. I could see it in his face. He wanted to protect me, but he also wanted me to have control again, to decide what came next. He sat down at the edge of the bed and said quietly, I spoke to a lawyer this morning. We have a strong case. Police reports, witness statements, the video, even the doctor's report. You don't have to decide anything now. But if you want to press charges, we can, and we'll do it together. I nodded slowly. We need to. Not just for me, but because they need to understand. They can't hurt people like that and walk away. He didn't say anything. He just reached for my hand again, and I held on. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just the pain or the trauma or the betrayal. It was the realization that for the first time, I was being seen. Not as the disappointment. Not as the quiet one. Not as the girl with paint under her nails. But as someone who mattered. Someone worth standing up for. They tried to ruin me. They thought they could humiliate me, control me, break me down. But they underestimated the one thing they never gave me. Love. Real love. And that changed everything. The days that followed moved, both fast and painfully slow. Appointments, statements, legal documents I never imagined I'd have to sign on the heels of what should have been the happiest day of my life. But through it all, Stephen was there. Every second, every meeting, every moment I felt like I might fall apart, he stayed steady, like he always had. The police gathered everything. Witness statements from Stephen's friends, cell phone footage of the speech, the moment Rebecca accused him, the moment my father raised the bat. Even the chaos after I hit the ground. It was all there. Unfiltered. Unedited. Unforgivable. The hospital provided the medical reports, the photos, the documentation of the injury. The prosecutor said it was more than enough. I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not relief, just numbness. Like my body was finally processing the weight of it all. The first court hearing was surreal. Oscar sat stiff in the defendant's chair, jaw clenched like he still thought he could intimidate me without saying a word. Rebecca wore all black, as if dressing for a funeral. Mira didn't even pretend to look regretful. She wore her guilt like an accessory she thought she could take off later. But the courtroom wasn't a place for pretending. Not anymore. I sat beside Stephen, hands folded, heart pounding. When they played the video, when the bat came down, when I crumpled to the ground, no one spoke. No one could. The entire room just froze. Even I couldn't watch the screen. I stared down at my lap, hearing it all but refusing to look. Then came the testimonies. The guests who spoke up, the server who saw my dad grab the bat, the friend who captured Rebecca's smug little toast, the lawyer who read the texts Mira sent before the wedding, laughing about spicing things up. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to twist what happened, it all unraveled in front of a judge who didn't blink once through the defense's arguments. When the verdicts came down, it wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no outbursts. Just a calm, steady voice reading the consequences they never thought they'd face. Oscar, guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. 6 years, no early parole. Rebecca, guilty of defamation, false accusation, and conspiracy to inflict emotional harm. 2 years, plus mandatory counseling. Mira, guilty of malicious intent and complicity in character assassination. 1 year, in county jail and 250 hours of community service. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I didn't even look at them. I just sat still and breathed. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't some movie ending where the villain gets dragged out screaming. It was quieter than that. More grounded. Like letting go of something I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. Cameras, microphones, questions we didn't answer. Stephen just wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulled me close, and whispered in my ear, "Now we live." I looked up at him, the man they tried so hard to tear down, the man they underestimated, from the moment he walked into my life, and I nodded. Not because I was happy. Not yet, but because for the first time in a long, long time, I finally felt free. A week after the trial ended, Stephen woke me up just after sunrise. He was standing by the window, holding 2 passports and a folded piece of paper. I blinked, still groggy. "What's that?" He smiled. Something quiet. Something beautiful. Just us. Inside the folder were 2 plane tickets to Switzerland. A cabin in the mountains. No phones. No chaos. No reminders of everything we'd just survived. I didn't even ask questions. I just said yes. 3 days. Later, we were surrounded by snow-dusted peaks and pine trees that stretched into the clouds. The cabin was tucked away in a clearing, all glass windows and warm wood, with a fire that crackled softly every night. It was quiet in a way I'd forgotten life could be. We slept in late, took long walks in the snow, made hot chocolate with cinnamon, and talked like we had all the time in the world. And maybe for the first time we actually did. There was one night, though, when I couldn't sleep. We were curled up on the couch, wrapped in blankets, staring out at the snow falling gently outside. I turned to Stephen and asked him something I'd been holding on to for a while. "If you could go back," I said quietly, "would you still hide who you were?" He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, because you saw me before the world did." I didn't respond right away. I just leaned my head against his shoulder, and we sat like that for a while, watching the snow, listening to the quiet, letting it sink in. Everything we'd gone through, everything we'd lost. And somehow, through all of it, we still had this. We returned home a few weeks later, stronger, calmer, still carrying the scars, but finally learning how to let them breathe instead of burying them. The mansion didn't feel intimidating anymore. It felt like ours, not because it was big or expensive, but because it was safe, because it held us the way family never had. We started making plans, not big ones, just small, beautiful things. What? To plant in the garden, where to hang the painting we picked up at a market in Zurich, whether we should get a dog. We weren't racing toward anything. We were just building something real. And I realized, maybe that awful day, the wedding, the lies, the blood on the grass, maybe that wasn't the end of anything. Maybe it was the beginning of truth, of healing, of a life where I didn't have to shrink just to make other people comfortable. A life where love wasn't conditional, where I wasn't constantly being measured against someone else's idea of who I should be. Stephen didn't just give me love. He gave me something my family never could, a place to belong. If this story hit you the way it hit me, leave your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you would have done. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Stories that aren't always perfect, but are always real. You know what to do. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.